Galactic Empire, surrender and offer tribute. Humans, run. The transmission came at dawn, a sweeping declaration carried through the void on encrypted frequencies, received by every government facility, military base and media station across Earth. A holographic projection flared to life over every major city, an imposing figure clad in ceremonial war armor, draped in regal banners of an empire spanning 1,000 worlds. I am Grand Primarch Velos of the Zyraethian Dominion. By the will of the imperial seat and the decree of the High Council, Earth has been judged. Your species, unremarkable and yet tenacious, stands at the precipice of history. Bow before the Dominion, surrender your sovereignty and offer tribute. Do so and you will be granted a place in our hierarchy. Resist and you will be eradicated. The silence that followed was deafening. The entire planet seemed to pause as billions of humans took in the words of the alien overlord. This wasn't first contact. Humanity had long suspected other civilizations among the stars. But this was a demand for submission, a thinly veiled threat of annihilation. For an agonizing 30 seconds no response came. Then, over a secure channel, a single-word reply was transmitted back to the Zyraethian fleet. Run. On the bridge of the Zyraethian flagship Invictus Imperator, Grand Primarch Velos narrowed his eyes. The audacity. The sheer arrogance of this primitive species. The room, a vast command chamber lined with holographic displays and tactical projections, grew eerily still as his officers absorbed the reply. They mock us, scoffed Admiral Zelvar, his clawed fingers tightening around the edge of the tactical console. Velos exhaled, suppressing his amusement. No, he said coolly. They misunderstand. They believe resistance is an option. A gesture of his hand brought up planetary schematics, outlining Earth's orbital defenses, a modest fleet of outdated vessels, and a planetary network of missile systems. Primitive. Laughable. Admiral, prepare the fleets. We will make an example of this world. Meanwhile, deep within the fortified command center of the United Terran Defense Coalition, Supreme Commander Helena Cade studied the incoming data. The Zyraethian fleet was massive. Hundreds of capital ships, battlecruisers and planetary siege platforms were moving into attack formations. To any outside observer, it looked like an overwhelming force descending upon a doomed world. But Earth wasn't just any world. Humanity wasn't just any species. Cade turned to her chief strategist. Are they in position? General Marcus Raines grinned. They've already started moving. Across the solar system, the true nature of humanity's preparations was unfolding. Deep space listening posts had tracked alien fleet movements for decades. AI-assisted war simulations had run through every possible scenario. The response to a threat like this had been decided long before the ultimatum was ever delivered. The Zyraethians thought they were invading a defenseless planet. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. The Zyraethian fleet moved into standard planetary siege formation. Orbital bombardment arrays locked onto strategic targets. Thousands of assault craft stood ready to deploy troops. On board, Velos observed the final adjustments with a measured satisfaction. All units commence. A blinding flash interrupted him. Then another. And another. In a matter of seconds, the fleet's perimeter collapsed as dozens of ships erupted into fireballs. Shockwaves rippled through the armada, tearing apart formations and sending battlecruisers careening into one another. Velos staggered, gripping the command console as emergency sirens blared. What? Zelvar bellowed. Where is that fire coming from? Hollow displays flickered, revealing the unthinkable. The attack wasn't coming from planetary defenses. It wasn't even originating from Earth. It was coming from behind them. Human warships, sleek and deadly, emerged from the shadows of the asteroid belt and deep space concealment points. Entire battle groups, far more advanced than any intelligence reports had indicated, unleashed coordinated salvos of railgun fire, hypersonic missiles, and experimental gravitic warheads. Zyraethian shields buckled. Their carefully orchestrated invasion plan was crumbling before it even began. On board the Invictus Imperator, Velos clenched his jaw as realization set in. Humanity hadn't just been preparing for this war. They had been waiting for it. In Earth's command center, Helena Cade watched the chaos unfold with grim satisfaction. The Zyraethians had underestimated them. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake? Coming to Earth in the first place. Bring in the second wave, she ordered. Across the battlefield, hidden human fleets activated warp drives and materialized into the heart of the alien formation. Advanced strike craft swarmed enemy vessels, disabling engines, targeting weapons systems, cutting through Zyrethian defenses like a hot knife through butter. The hunters had become the hunted. And the war had only just begun. Admiral Kale Varzan of the Galactic Empire's Dominion fleet leaned back in his command throne, watching the holographic display of Earth with an air of detached superiority. Humanity's homeworld sat pristine below, its blue oceans and green continents untouched by war. Pity, he thought. It would have made a fine Imperial asset. The bridge of his warship, Imperius Maxima, buzzed with the controlled efficiency of an empire that had conquered hundreds of worlds. Officers moved in perfect unison, their uniforms crisp, their expressions composed. There was no doubt in their minds, this was just another formality. The Empire had subjugated species far more advanced than these humans. A transmission flickered onto the main view screen. The human representative was an older man, sharp-eyed, clad in a simple black uniform. Unlike most species faced with Imperial dominance, he showed no sign of fear. "You have 10 minutes to surrender, offer tribute, and accept Imperial rule," Admiral Kale declared, his voice smooth and practiced. "Failure to comply will result in immediate planetary pacification." The human didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, a ghost of a smile forming. "No." A murmur rippled through the bridge crew. Kale narrowed his eyes. "I'm sorry, did you misunderstand the terms, human?" The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, we understand just fine. We simply reject them." Kale exhaled slowly through his nose, gripping the armrests of his throne. "Rejection is not an option." "Oh, but it is," the human said lightly. "And you should take it. Run." A deadly silence settled over the bridge. Then laughter. Cold, arrogant laughter from the Imperial officers. Kale smirked, shaking his head. "I see. You believe you have a choice in this matter." He gestured toward the comms officer. "End transmission." The screen went black. Kale turned to his second-in-command, Captain Orcs. "Target their orbital defenses. Destroy their satellites, cripple their communication networks. We will bring them to their knees before they realize how foolish they've been." "By your command, Admiral." The Imperial fleet moved with precision, warships forming a blockade over Earth. Their battlecruisers activated orbital bombardment protocols. Weapons charged. And then, something went wrong. A flicker across the Dominion fleet's displays. A distortion. Then, darkness. All at once, every Imperial warship system shut down. The bridge of the Imperius Maxima plunged into chaos. Screens turned to static. Weapons flickered and powered down. Shield generators failed. The Great Dominion fleet, an armada that had conquered countless worlds, was blind, deaf, and defenseless. "Status report." Kale barked, forcing himself to remain composed. The comms officer frantically worked his console. "Sir, we've lost all external communications. Our targeting systems are down." Another officer added, panic creeping into his voice. "Sensors unresponsive. Shields offline." Kale clenched his jaw. Impossible. Nothing, not even the most sophisticated enemy empires, had ever disrupted Dominion technology like this. And then the human's voice returned. The same smooth, calm tone. Except now it came from their own command systems. "We told you to run." Then the first ship exploded. A massive Imperial dreadnought, Gladius Rex, tore apart in a brilliant detonation. The blast was unnatural. There was no visible projectile, no energy weapon signature. One moment it was intact. The next it was gone. And then another. Dominus Aeternum vanished in a pulse of white-hot energy. The Dominion fleet, the jewel of the Galactic Empire, was being eradicated. Not in battle. Not by war. But by something else. By humanity. Kale shot up from his command throne, his face pale. "What is happening?" Captain Orcs stared at the destruction, horror in his eyes. "Sir, they're not fighting us. They're deleting us." Kale froze. His mind, trained in the ways of war, struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. This wasn't a rebellion. This wasn't a war. This was erasure. And the humans had just begun. Admiral Kale Varzan had seen countless civilizations bow before the might of the Galactic Empire. Some surrendered immediately, understanding the futility of resistance. Others fought, struggling for days, weeks, sometimes even months before their inevitable collapse. But never, not once, had a species responded to an Imperial ultimatum with laughter. As the human transmission cut off, an eerie silence settled over the Imperius Maxima's bridge. Then, with a slight smirk, Kale turned toward his second-in-command. "Begin the attack." Captain Orcs nodded, relaying the order to the fleet. Across the vast Imperial Armada, hundreds of warships moved into position. Tactical cruisers locked onto planetary defense grids. Orbital bombardment frigates readied their payloads. It was a textbook operation. Humans were technologically inferior, strategically outmatched, and completely surrounded. It would be over in minutes, or so they thought. Orbital strike, intercepted. The Imperius Maxima S weapons officer initiated the first phase of the assault. Firing electronic warfare barrage. Jamming all human communications now. A series of pulses erupted from the Empire's flagship, spreading across Earth's upper atmosphere. Designed to shut down enemy networks, this attack had crushed the resistance of entire civilizations in the past. This time something went wrong. Sir, the comms officer frowned. Our jamming signals are bouncing back? Kale stiffened. What? On the main display, the interference patterns reversed direction, as if Earth's defenses were absorbing and reflecting the attack right back at them. Suddenly, red warning indicators filled the screen. Admiral, our targeting systems are being scrambled. Impossible. Kale barked. But then, something truly impossible happened. Earth fired first. A flash of light erupted from the planet's surface, streaking upward like a comet. It moved far too fast for primitive human technology. Faster than any known missile, any known railgun slug. It was an energy-based projectile, one that should not exist at this level of development. It impacted one of the Imperial battlecruisers at the front of the formation, and it didn't just destroy it. It erased it. The warship, nearly 2 kilometers long, was consumed in an instant. No explosion. No debris. Just a burst of white-hot light and then, nothing. Silence. Admiral Kale rose slowly from his command throne, his heart pounding in his chest. His officers were frozen, staring at the empty void where an Imperial warship had been just seconds ago. Then the second shot came. Another Imperial ship vanished. Then a third. And still no debris. No wreckage. The entire mass of these colossal warships had been disintegrated at a molecular level. Kale's blood ran cold. What kind of weapon is that? But there was no time to analyze. Because Earth wasn't done. The war turns in an instant. On the planet below, inside an underground command center hidden beneath the Rocky Mountains, a group of human military leaders watched the battlefield unfold. General Elias Grant smirked as he leaned back in his chair. Looks like they finally noticed. A young officer turned toward him. Shall we proceed with Phase 2, sir? Grant exhaled, glancing at the countdown on the display. The words Relativity Kill Order, Engaged pulsed in bright red. Initiate. In orbit, the Imperial fleet struggled to regroup. Panic spread through the ranks as their ships, the most powerful in the galaxy, fell one by one. Then the real nightmare began. A strange gravitational anomaly appeared around the fleet. Kale's gut twisted as every alarm on the bridge screamed in protest. Admiral, an officer shouted. Our engines, something's wrong. Kale didn't need the explanation. He could feel it. The air itself felt heavier, as if some unseen force was dragging the fleet down. Then, without warning, ships began crumpling. Not exploding. Not breaking apart. Crumpling. Entire warships folded inward, their reinforced hulls compressing as though they were caught inside an invisible black hole. Sir. Kale turned toward his sensors officer, but the man's voice cut off. Because right before his eyes, the officer's face stretched, as if time itself had just glitched. Kale's vision blurred. His own hand looked distorted. The laws of physics were breaking down. And then, the fleet started to run. The once mighty Imperial Armada, the same force that had conquered entire star systems without challenge, did something that had never happened in its history. It retreated. And as the Imperial warships fled in terror, only one thought burned in Kale's mind. What the hell are humans? Admiral Kale Varzan had fought in hundreds of campaigns, but nothing, had ever prepared him for what he had just witnessed. The Ardent Wrath, an Imperial battlecruiser designed to withstand planetary bombardments, ceased to exist in a single blast. No wreckage. No debris. Just an expanding cloud of ionized gas where one of the Empire's most formidable warships had been. Admiral, we've lost the Ardent Wrath. Unknown weapon signature detected. Kale clenched his jaw, his mind racing. What kind of weapon was that? No species had developed planetary defense systems capable of one-shotting an Imperial capital ship. Not even the Ascended, a species that had been subjugated centuries ago after a decades-long war. Yet here was Earth, A world that, according to every known intelligence report, had barely begun deep space exploration, unleashing a first strike so devastating that it defied reason. And the worst part? It was just the beginning. A galaxy's worth of arrogance. Admiral incoming. The second blast came before Kale had a chance to issue an order. A pulse of energy erupted from Earth's surface once more, this time splitting mid-flight. It forked into 6 distinct beams, each homing in on a different Imperial warship. 6 more cruisers vanished. Not destroyed. Erased. By now, the bridge crew of the Imperius Maxima had gone deathly silent. Every officer, every battle-hardened veteran of the Empire's wars, stood frozen in place. Because something fundamental had shifted. This was no longer a conquest. It was a trap. The Galactic Empire had walked into a battlefield they didn't even understand yet. Kale gritted his teeth, forcing his voice to remain steady. Pull back the first assault fleet. Begin evasive. Negative, Admiral. The sensor officer shouted, panic creeping into his voice. We're being interdicted. Kale's blood ran cold. An interdiction field? Impossible. The only known gravity-based interdiction technology in the galaxy belonged to the Empire itself. No other species had cracked that kind of physics. And yet, every ship in his fleet was now locked in place, trapped by an invisible force that Earth should not possess. His hands curled into fists. How? How did humans have this level of technology? And why had they never shown it before? Humanity unleashed. A new transmission crackled to life across the bridge. This time it was not an ultimatum. It was a simple, calm statement. You were warned. Then the real slaughter began. Across Earth's orbit, hidden platforms decloaked, their camouflage shimmering away like the peeling of a mirage. These were not mere satellites. They were weapons, battle stations covered in railgun arrays, plasma accelerators and energy lances powerful enough to punch through shields like paper. They had been there the entire time. Waiting. The humans had let the Empire come. Let them position themselves. Let them believe this would be a simple conquest. And now they were springing the trap shut. Panic in the fleet. A rapid series of explosions rocked the Imperial formation as railgun slugs, each the size of a dropship, punched through warships with terrifying precision. Defensive maneuvers were pointless. Their ships were stuck inside the interdiction field. Their shields? Useless against weapons moving at near light speeds. Their commanders? Paralyzed, unable to comprehend how an inferior species was systematically dismantling the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Kale forced himself to think. If they didn't break free of this trap now, there would be no fleet left to save. Find me a way out of this field, he snapped. Now. The crew scrambled. Desperate. Terrified. But deep in his gut, Kale felt something he had never felt before. For the first time in his career he was afraid. The trap closes, continued. An interdiction field. That meant only one thing. Retreat was impossible. The Galactic Empire had always relied on its superior mobility, using warp jumps to reposition, retreat, or reinforce as needed. But now, every Imperial warship in Earth's orbit was locked in place. The implications hit Kale like a plasma strike to the chest. The humans weren't just defending their planet. They had prepared this battlefield down to the last detail. A species with no interstellar presence had somehow created an interdiction field strong enough to keep an entire Imperial invasion fleet from escaping. Oh. Kale forced himself to remain calm. Think. Analyze. Find a weakness. He turned to his science officer, a Zalari strategist renowned for his intellect. Options. Now. The officer's normally placid expression was twisted in something terrifyingly close to fear. Admiral, this doesn't make sense. There are no visible interdiction pylons. No orbital stations generating gravity wells. It's as if the field is coming directly from the planet itself. Kale's hands clenched into fists. That's impossible. Yet so was everything else about this war. A chorus of alarms interrupted his thoughts. Admiral. Incoming bogies, hundreds of them. They just appeared on our scanners. Kale turned to the main tactical display. His breath caught. Swarming up from the planet's surface, launching from hidden bases buried beneath the crust, came a fleet of human warships. They weren't sleek or elegant like Imperial vessels. They were brutal, angular, and terrifyingly utilitarian. And they were fast. Hundreds of them accelerating at velocities that should have torn their pilots apart. Their hulls were wrapped in exotic materials that baffled Imperial scanners. No energy signatures, no recognizable tech, just silence. Kale's stomach dropped as realization dawned. The humans hadn't just prepared defenses. They had built an entire shadow fleet hidden right beneath the Empire's nose. And now it was time to strike. The hunters become the hunted. Open fire. Full bombardment pattern. Kale roared, snapping out of his stunned paralysis. 100 Imperial warships lit up the void, unleashing a storm of plasma lances, hyperrail slugs, and fusion torpedoes. The humans didn't even try to dodge. They flew straight through the storm, their ships twisting at impossible angles, skimming past railgun shells and weaving through plasma bursts like they had somehow predicted the attack patterns in advance. Then came their return fire. It wasn't energy-based. It wasn't even projectile-based in the way the Empire understood. It was something else. Imperial ships blinked out of existence as if reality itself had erased them. Kale's mind reeled. What kind of weapons were these? This wasn't just advanced technology. This was a new way of waging war. And the Empire had no answer for it. The last command. Kale took a shuddering breath. The battle was lost. His fleet was being annihilated, his warships helpless before the sheer technological supremacy of these primitive humans. There was only one thing left to do. He turned to his comms officer. Send a message to the Emperor. The officer swallowed hard but nodded. Kale forced himself to stand tall. He would deliver this report with dignity. Imperial High Command, this is Admiral Kale Varzan. Do not send reinforcements. Do not escalate. Humanity is not what we believe them to be. They are not prey. They are not primitive. They are the apex predators of this galaxy. And we were fools to challenge them. The comms officer sent the message just before the bridge was bathed in white light. The Imperius Maxima ceased to exist. Admiral Kale had fought in countless wars, crushed rebellions, and seen civilizations erased from existence under the might of the Galactic Empire. Never once had he felt fear. Until now. The humans weren't retreating. They weren't desperate defenders clinging to their homeworld in a futile struggle. They were the apex predators of this battlefield. And the Empire had just stepped into their trap. Kale's mind raced as he analyzed the unfolding chaos. This wasn't war. This was a slaughter. The Empire's fleet, vast and technologically superior, should have been an unstoppable force. But the humans had rewritten the rules of engagement. Imperial plasma lances, the pride of the fleet, tore through space, but the human warships moved too fast. They danced through the carnage with impossible agility, their angular hulls twisting through the void in patterns no Imperial ship could match. And when they returned fire, the results were catastrophic. The human weapons weren't standard energy projectiles. They ignored shields, burning through Imperial armor like it was paper. Entire capital ships vanished in seconds, their hulls eaten away by what Kale's sensors identified as kinetic weaponry moving at relativistic speeds. Railguns? That was impossible. Railguns were outdated technology considered crude and inefficient. But humans had perfected them. And now, the Empire's finest warships were dying under the relentless assault of thousands of projectiles per second. Each impact sent shockwaves through the fleet, throwing formations into disarray. Explosions bloomed across the void like dying stars. The comm channels became a chorus of panicked screams. Our shields aren't stopping them. Hull breaches on multiple decks, containment failing. They're targeting our engines, we're dead in the water. Kale gritted his teeth. Deploy countermeasures. Adaptive formations, now. The fleet desperately shifted tactics, trying to create distance. Faster. Smarter. Anything to halt the carnage. It didn't matter. The humans never slowed down. They didn't fight like the Empire. They didn't rely on slow-moving capital ships or predictable formations. They were hunters. And the Empire had just become prey. The final order. Kale clenched the edge of his command throne, his mind racing. They couldn't win this battle. That left one option, escape. If he could break through the interdiction field, if even a fraction of the fleet could escape, he could warn the Emperor. He could return with everything the Empire had. But that meant finding a weakness in the human trap. Science officer, he barked. The interdiction field, where is it weakest? The Zalari scientist worked frantically, scanning the surrounding space. His pale skin had turned ashen, his hands trembling. And then his voice broke. Admiral, there is no weak point. Kale felt his stomach turn to ice. Explain. The officer swallowed hard. Sir, the field isn't being generated by an orbital structure or stationary device. It's being projected from Earth itself. A deadly silence filled the bridge. Kale's mind reeled at the implications. A planetary-scale interdiction field? That should be impossible. The amount of power required, the sheer technological leap necessary. They were fighting an enemy they didn't understand. Kale's jaw tightened. He had no time for disbelief. The Empire had one last chance. Then we break through manually. It was a suicide move, but it was their only hope. All remaining ships concentrate fire. We punch a hole through the enemy line and force an escape. The fleet shifted, the massive Imperial dreadnoughts surging forward, their remaining firepower focused into a single devastating charge. For a moment it seemed to work. The overwhelming mass of Imperial ships forced the human fleet to adjust. They fell back, repositioning. Kale's heart pounded. Yes, there. A small opening. Then the human fleet vanished. Not retreated. Not destroyed. Vanished. The sensors showed nothing. No warp signatures. No lingering trails. Just emptiness. A cold chill ran down Kale's spine. This was wrong. And then the first ship exploded from within. A massive Imperial dreadnought, one of the fleet's most powerful warships, detonated from the inside out, splitting apart as if an invisible force had crushed it. Then another. And another. Kale watched in horror as his fleet collapsed from within. The human warships hadn't retreated. They had infiltrated the Imperial vessels. Kale's eyes darted to the nearest viewport. And then he saw it. Tiny, sleek human assault pods had embedded themselves into Imperial hulls, cutting through armor and bulkheads with surgical precision. They had boarded the ships. Mid-battle. Kale turned to his tactical officer. Status on counterboarding measures? The officer's voice was flat with terror. Sir, we never detected them. By the time we knew they were inside, it was already over. The fleet wasn't just being destroyed. It was being taken. The Galactic Empire had always been the galaxy's most feared force. But now, in real time, Kale watched as his empire's most powerful fleet was absorbed into the human war machine. Admiral, the communications officer choked out. We have an incoming message, from the enemy. Kale's blood ran cold. Put it through. The holoscreen flickered to life. And there they were. Not monsters. Not conquerors. Humans. Their leader, an older man with sharp, calculating eyes, stared at Kale with something between amusement and pity. When he spoke, his voice was calm. Your war is over. Kale felt his hands tremble. His entire fleet, millions of soldiers, the pride of the Empire, was gone. This isn't possible, he whispered. The human commander tilted his head. You never bothered to study us. You assumed we were weak because we hadn't expanded into the stars. A small smile. Cold. Absolute. That was your first mistake. Kale swallowed. And our second? The human leaned forward. Invading us. The screen cut to black. Kale's breath came in ragged gasps. His command ship, the last remaining Imperial vessel, was surrounded. Hundreds of human warships. Thousands of cannons. No escape. No reinforcements. Kale took a long, shuddering breath. He had lost. He stood, straightened his uniform, and whispered the last order he would ever give. Stand down. The bridge fell silent. And with that, the Galactic Empire's greatest fleet surrendered to Earth. The war that should have lasted decades had ended in mere hours. Epilogue, the beginning of a new era. News of the catastrophic defeat spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Empire, once seen as an unbreakable force, had been dismantled overnight. Civilizations that had feared Imperial rule now rose up in rebellion. Entire star systems broke away, refusing to acknowledge the Empire's authority. The Emperor himself, upon hearing of the loss of his greatest fleet, reportedly sat in stunned silence for 3 full days. And Earth? The humans didn't gloat. They didn't conquer. They simply sent a message to the galaxy. One that would be remembered for millennia. We did not seek war. But if you bring it to us, you will not survive it. And with that, the balance of power in the universe was forever changed. The humans never slowed down. They didn't fight like the Empire. They didn't rely on slow-moving capital ships or predictable formations. They were hunters. And the Imperial fleet was prey. Admiral Kale's flagship, the indomitable Wrath, was one of the last warships still operational. Around him, the bridge crew worked feverishly, desperately rerouting power, trying to patch through fragmented commands. Kale clenched his jaw, eyes darting over the collapsing battle map. It was over. The once mighty Imperial Grand Armada, annihilated. Hundreds of warships lay in ruins, their shattered hulls drifting through space like ghosts of a fallen empire. The few vessels that remained were either in full retreat or being hunted down with surgical precision. And the humans? They had barely taken any losses. Kale's hands trembled over the console. He had underestimated them. The entire empire had. They had believed humanity would kneel, that they would bend the knee like every other species before them. Instead, they had unleashed a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. And it was just getting started. A transmission flickered onto his console, an open hail from the human fleet commander. Kale exhaled shakily and accepted the link. The view screen lit up, revealing a human officer standing in the center of a sleek, high-tech command deck. He was calm, unshaken. Unlike Kale, he knew he had already won. The human officer leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. Admiral Kale. Kale swallowed hard. This is a violation of galactic law. Humanity had no right. The human cut him off. You invaded us. Kale's mandibles clenched. He had no rebuttal. The human's voice remained cold. We don't fight wars to make a point. We fight wars to end them. Kale's blood ran cold. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a death sentence. The human commander glanced off-screen, a silent signal. Kale's flagship shuddered violently. The lights flickered. Consoles exploded. The sound of ripping metal filled the bridge. They hadn't even fired on him directly. They had ripped his ship apart from the inside, hacking its systems, overloading the core, killing him without ever pulling a trigger. Kale had enough time for one final thought before the indomitable wrath exploded in a blinding wave of fire. The Empire had declared war on humans. Humanity had declared extermination. Epilogue. The Galactic Empire no longer existed. Word of the humans' 5-hour victory spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Species that once trembled before the Empire now watched in stunned silence as humanity ascended. They hadn't just won. They had rewritten what war even meant. The surviving remnants of the Empire's leadership sued for peace, if peace was even possible. But when they sent emissaries to humanity, only one message was returned. Run. And they did. For the first time in galactic history, an empire fell in a single day. And humanity stood alone at the top. The end.